Thalia huddled in the dimly lit cargo hold, her knees drawn to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The cold metal floor bit into her skin, but she was too numb to care. This was her life now, a nightmare from which there was no escape. She couldn't believe it had come to this, sold by her own father, the man who was supposed to protect her, to a vile Turonian traitor known for his cruelty and perverse appetites. Thalia had always known her father was a gambling addict, but she never thought he would stoop so low as to sell his only daughter to pay off his debts. Hot tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to give her captors the satisfaction of seeing her break. She was Thalia Corell, daughter of the once proud House of El. She would endure this indignity with all the strength and courage of her ancestors. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hold, and Thalia tensed, her heart pounding in her chest. The door slid open, revealing the bloated, grotesque form of her new master, Gorak the Vile. "On your feet, slave," he growled, his yellow eyes raking over her trembling form with undisguised lust. "It's time to put that pretty little body of yours to work." Thalia stood on shaky legs, her stomach churning with revulsion. She knew what he wanted, what he would force her to do. The thought made her want to vomit, but she swallowed back the bile, her jaw clenched in defiance. "I am not your slave," she spat, her violet eyes blazing with hatred. "I am a free woman, and I will never submit to you." Gorak laughed, a cruel, grating sound that made Thalia's skin crawl. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But it won't last long. They all break in the end." He reached for her, his meaty hands grasping at her slender form. Thalia recoiled, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. She was trapped, a bird in a gilded cage, her wings clipped and her spirit slowly dying. As Gorak's hands roamed over her body, Thalia retreated deep inside herself to a place where his touch couldn't reach her. She thought of her home, of the rolling hills and crystal streams of Krypton. She thought of her mother's gentle smile, her brother's infectious laughter. But even those precious memories were tainted now, poisoned by the betrayal of the man who had sold her into this hell. Thalia felt something break inside her, a vital piece of her soul shattering like glass. Days turned into weeks, and the abuse continued unabated. Gorak took great pleasure in humiliating her, forcing her to perform degrading acts for his amusement. He paraded her around like a trophy, a pretty bauble to be admired and envied by his vile associates. Thalia tried to fight back at first, to hold on to her dignity and sense of self, but each act of defiance was met with swift and brutal punishment. Gorak beat her until she was black and blue, until she could barely stand. He starved her, denying her food and water until she was weak and delirious. Slowly, inevitably, Thalia felt her will to resist eroding. What was the point in fighting when all it brought was more pain and suffering? Better to submit, to endure, to survive. But even as she told herself this, Thalia felt a part of herself dying inside. The bright, vibrant girl she had once been was fading away, replaced by a hollow shell, a ghost in a living body. She stopped dreaming of escape, stopped hoping for rescue. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. All that mattered now was survival, getting through each day without breaking completely. But even that was becoming harder and harder with each passing day. Thalia felt herself slipping further into despair. She began to wonder if death would be preferable to this endless torment, this living hell. Months passed, and Thalia's existence became a blur of pain and degradation. Gorak grew bored of her and began to loan her out to his friends and business associates. She was passed around like a party favor, a plaything to be used and discarded at will. Thalia no longer resisted, no longer fought back. She had learned the hard way that resistance only brought more pain, more suffering. Better to go limp, to let them do as they pleased. It was easier that way, less painful. But even as her body submitted, her mind rebelled. Thalia retreated deep inside herself to a place where their filthy hands and leering eyes couldn't reach her. She built walls around her heart, around her soul, determined to protect what little remained of her shattered psyche. She stopped feeling, stopped caring. Numbness became her only defense, her only solace. She moved through her days like a robot, performing her duties with mechanical efficiency but feeling nothing. Gorak noticed the change in her, and it only seemed to excite him more. He took perverse pleasure in trying to break through her walls, to elicit some reaction, some sign of life. He beat her more savagely, degraded her more thoroughly, but still Thalia remained impassive, her violet eyes dull and lifeless, her spirit broken beyond repair. Even in her numb state, Thalia couldn't help but marvel at the depths of Gorak's cruelty. He was a monster, a sadist who took pleasure in the suffering of others, and she was his favorite victim, his most prized possession. Sometimes, in her darkest moments, Thalia found herself wondering what she had done to deserve this fate. Had she been so wicked in a past life, so evil that the universe saw fit to punish her in this one? Deep down, she knew it was a foolish thought. The universe was cold and uncaring, indifferent to the suffering of its creatures. There was no grand plan, no cosmic justice. There was only random chance and the cruelty of men. As the months dragged on, Thalia felt herself fading away piece by piece. Her memories of her old life grew hazy, distant. Had she ever been happy, ever been free? She couldn't remember anymore. All she knew was the pain, the fear, the endless cycle of abuse and degradation. This was her reality now, her inescapable truth. Some small, stubborn part of her still clung to the hope that one day someone would come for her, a hero, a savior, someone to rescue her from this nightmare. But as time passed, even that faint hope began to dim. No one was coming for her. No one cared. She was alone, forever lost in this hell of her own making. Thalia had almost resigned herself to her fate when fate itself intervened. It began as just another day in her bleak existence, another round of serving drinks and enduring Gorak's lewd comments and wandering hands. But then the unthinkable happened. The door to Gorak's private lounge burst open, and a tall, lean human male strode in, his piercing blue eyes blazing with righteous fury. Nate Hunter had seen a lot of depravity in his life. As a former soldier turned mercenary, he'd witnessed the depths of sentient beings' cruelty. But nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him when he burst into Gorak's private lounge. A young girl, barely out of her teens, huddled in the corner, her violet eyes dull and lifeless, her spirit clearly broken. And Gorak, that vile piece of filth, stood over her with a leering grin, his intentions all too clear. Rage, hot and fierce, surged through Nate's veins. He'd come here to settle a score with Gorak, to make the bastard pay for double-crossing him on a job. But this was something else entirely. "Get away from her, you sick bastard," Nate growled, his hand dropping to the blaster at his hip. Gorak spun around, his eyes widening in surprise and fear. He knew Nate by reputation, knew that the human was not to be trifled with. "Hunter," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "This is none of your business. The girl is mine, bought and paid for." Nate's lip curled in disgust. "She's a person, not a piece of property. And from the looks of it, she's been through hell. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to let her go. And then you and I are going to have a little chat about that job you screwed me over on." Gorak's eyes darted to the door, calculating his odds of escape. But Nate was faster. In one fluid motion, he drew his blaster and fired, the bolt catching Gorak square in the chest. The Turonian crumpled to the ground. A look of shocked disbelief etched on his bloated face. Nate holstered his weapon and turned to the girl, his heart clenching at the sight of her. She was thin, too thin, her bones jutting out at sharp angles beneath her pale skin. And her eyes, God, her eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, suffered too much. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "It's okay. You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl stared at him blankly, no flicker of emotion crossing her face. Nate's heart sank. What had those bastards done to her to break her so completely? Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. "My name's Nate," he said, his voice low and soothing. "What's yours?" For a long moment, the girl said nothing. Then, in a voice so soft he had to strain to hear it, she whispered, "Thalia." Nate smiled, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thalia. That's a beautiful name. Listen, Thalia, I know you've been through hell, and I know you have no reason to trust me, but I promise you I'm not like those other bastards. I'm here to help you." Thalia stared at him, her violet eyes searching his face for any sign of deceit. But all she saw was sincerity and a deep, abiding compassion that took her breath away. Slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Nate's smile widened, and he gently helped her to her feet. "Come on, let's get you out of here. We'll find you some clean clothes and something to eat, and then, if you're up for it, you can tell me your story. I have a feeling it's one that needs to be heard." As they walked out of that den of sin and depravity, Nate kept a protective arm around Thalia's shoulders. He could feel her trembling, could sense the fear and confusion radiating off her in waves. But beneath that, he sensed something else, a flicker of hope, a spark of resilience that refused to be extinguished. Thalia was a survivor, a fighter, and with his help, she would learn to live again. Nate knew it wouldn't be easy. Thalia had been through a trauma that would break most people, but he was determined to be there for her, to help her heal in whatever way he could. Because in that moment, as he looked down at the broken, beautiful girl beside him, Nate made a silent vow. He would be the father she never had, the protector she so desperately needed. And together, they would build a new life, a better life, free from the shadows of the past. As Nate led Thalia through the winding streets of Tau Station, he couldn't help but marvel at her strength. Despite the horror she had endured, she walked with her head held high, her steps growing more confident with each passing moment. "You're a brave one, you know that?" he said, glancing down at her with a smile. "Not many people could go through what you did and come out the other side." Thalia shrugged, a hint of color rising in her pale cheeks. "I didn't have a choice. It was either survive or..." She trailed off, her eyes growing distant. Nate's heart clenched, and he gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Hey, you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. I'm just saying, you're one tough cookie." Thalia looked up at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Cookie?" Nate chuckled, his blue eyes sparkling with mirth. "It's an old Earth saying. It means you're strong, resilient, like a cookie that doesn't crumble under pressure." Thalia considered this for a moment, then nodded. "I like that. I want to be a tough cookie. You already are, sweetheart. Trust me on that." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, weaving through the crowds of aliens and humans that thronged the station's main thoroughfare. Nate kept a watchful eye out for any sign of trouble, his free hand never straying far from his blaster. Finally, they reached their destination, a small, nondescript building tucked away in a quiet corner of the station. Nate punched in a code on the keypad, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. "Welcome to my humble abode," he said, ushering Thalia inside. "It's not much, but it's safe. And that's what matters most right now." Thalia looked around, taking in the sparse furnishings and utilitarian decor. It was a far cry from the opulent luxury of Gorak's compound, but to her, it felt like heaven. "It's perfect," she said softly, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you, Nate, for everything." Nate's heart swelled with emotion, and he had to blink back a few tears of his own. "You don't have to thank me, Thalia. I'm just doing what any decent person would do." But even as he said the words, Nate knew they weren't entirely true. He had seen plenty of decent people turn a blind eye to the suffering of others, too caught up in their own lives to get involved. What he was doing for Thalia went beyond decency. It was a calling, a purpose he had been searching for his entire life. "Listen, Thalia," he said, his voice growing serious. "I know we just met and you have no reason to trust me, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. I'll keep you safe, and I'll help you heal in any way I can. You're not alone anymore." Thalia stared at him, her violet eyes shimmering with emotion. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" Nate hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Because I know what it's like to feel lost and alone," he said finally. "I know what it's like to feel like the whole universe is against you. And I also know that sometimes all it takes is one person to make a difference. One person to show you that there's still good in the world, still something worth fighting for." He reached out and took Thalia's hand, his calloused fingers engulfing her small, delicate ones. "I want to be that person for you, Thalia. I want to show you that there's more to life than pain and suffering, that there's hope and joy and love. And I'll do whatever it takes to make that happen." Thalia's lower lip trembled, and a single tear slid down her cheek. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "No one has ever cared about me like this before." Nate smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Well, get used to it, kiddo, because from now on you've got me in your corner, and I'm not going anywhere." He pulled her into a hug, his strong arms wrapping around her thin frame. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Thalia felt safe. Truly, completely safe. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. She had a lot of healing to do, a lot of demons to face. But with Nate by her side, she felt like anything was possible. Because he wasn't just her savior, her protector. He was her friend, her family. And together, they would build a new life, a better life, free from the shadows of the past. In the weeks that followed, Nate and Thalia fell into a comfortable routine. By day, Nate taught her the ins and outs of life on Tau Station, showing her how to navigate the bustling markets and avoid the seedier elements of the population. By night, they would sit together in the small living room of their apartment, talking and laughing and slowly, tentatively learning to trust one another. Nate was endlessly patient with Thalia, never pushing her to talk about her past or the horrors she had endured. Instead, he focused on the present, on building a foundation of safety and security that would allow her to heal at her own pace. He taught her how to defend herself, showing her the basics of hand-to-hand combat and how to handle a blaster. He knew that the universe was a dangerous place, especially for a young girl like Thalia, and he was determined to give her the tools she needed to protect herself. But more than that, he taught her how to live, how to find joy in the simple things like a warm meal shared with a friend or a beautiful sunset over the station's artificial horizon. He showed her that there was still beauty in the world, still things worth fighting for and believing in. Slowly, day by day, Thalia began to heal. The haunted look in her eyes faded, replaced by a spark of hope and determination. She smiled more, laughed more, and even began to open up about her past. Nate listened with a heavy heart as she told him about her life on Krypton, about the loving family she had lost and the betrayal that had shattered her world. He marveled at her strength, at the unbreakable spirit that had allowed her to survive the unspeakable. And he made her a promise, a solemn vow that he would spend the rest of his life keeping. "You'll never be alone again, Thalia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll always be here for you, no matter what. You're my family now, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe and happy." Thalia looked up at him, her violet eyes shining with tears and gratitude. "I know you will, Nate. I trust you with my life. And I love you." Nate's heart swelled with emotion, and he pulled her into a fierce hug. "I love you too, kiddo, more than anything in this whole crazy universe." From that moment on, they were inseparable. Nate threw himself into his work as a mercenary, taking on jobs that would allow him to provide for Thalia and keep her safe. And Thalia, for her part, blossomed under his care and guidance. She was a quick learner with a sharp mind and an insatiable curiosity. She devoured every book and datapad Nate brought her, learning about history and science and all the wonders the universe had to offer. And as she grew stronger and more confident, she began to accompany Nate on his jobs, learning the trade and proving herself to be a valuable asset. Together, they were an unstoppable team, feared and respected throughout the galaxy. But even as they built a new life together, Nate never forgot the vow he had made. He was Thalia's protector, her guardian, and he would do whatever it took to keep her safe and happy, because she was more than just his adopted daughter, more than just his partner in crime. She was his heart, his soul, the very best part of himself. And he knew with a certainty that went beyond words that he would love her and fight for her until his dying breath. As they sat together in the cockpit of their ship, watching the stars streak by outside the viewport, Nate turned to Thalia with a smile. "You know, kiddo, when I first met you, I had no idea how much you would change my life. But now I can't imagine my world without you in it." Thalia leaned her head against his shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "I feel the same way, Nate. You saved me in every way a person can be saved, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that." Nate pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his heart full to bursting with love and pride. "You already are, Thalia. You already are." And together, they flew on into the endless reaches of space, ready to face whatever challenges and adventures the universe had in store. Because they knew that as long as they had each other, there was nothing they couldn't overcome, nothing they couldn't achieve. They were a family bound by love and loyalty and the unbreakable bonds of the heart. And that was a force more powerful than any in the universe.